And Nice Guy Eddie, straight over to Nice Guy Eddie on the pops. Let's see. Hello, good morning. Good morning. Let's go straight over. Pop the chat and let's go over to Nice Guy Eddie, Richard Tice. Hello, Richard. What's the big announcement? Let's see if it is a big announcement. Always interesting policy announcements. And Nice Guy Eddie, straight over to Nice Guy Eddie on the pops. Let's see. Hello, good morning. Shut up, you. You be quiet. Here we go, straight over. Nice guy as well, Mr. Bull. Let's turn this up, bad boy up.
To everyone here in the room, good morning to you if you're watching on our live stream, and it's wonderful to see so many people here. I don't think I need to tell you, but this country obviously is in crisis. You know, when you look at what is actually going on, we now have the highest tax burden that we've had in the last 70 years. We've had 400 tax rises. And when you look at those two main parties, they don't seem to have a cogent answer to what we should do. And that's why we have come up with our emergency recovery plan. I'm absolutely delighted that this is a very substantial document. It's very exciting. And I'm delighted to introduce the leader of Reform UK, ladies and gentlemen, Richard Tice.
Nice Guy Eddie!
Thank you very much. Thank you, David. How kind. Nice when people are, welcoming on a Monday morning. I really do appreciate everybody coming in. I know it's a busy time, Monday morning, and whilst the sun is shining out there, the honest truth is that the news is pretty grim. The news is pretty bad. However, what I'm going to present today is good news because there is actually a solution to the bad economic news out there. Only this morning, we've had the latest GDP figures, surprisingly bad. Surprisingly perhaps to the government, possibly not surprising to all of us here, where GDP has fallen by 0.3%, even though it's expected to rise. Now, we've also got the OECD. They've said last week that the UK next year will be the worst performer in the whole of the G20, except Russia. So the news is bad. And that's why what we're going to be talking about today is an emergency recovery plan. How we grow our way out of this crisis. You cannot do what the Chancellor thinks you can do, which is to tax your way out of this crisis. You've got a document. Those of you watching live on live stream, it should be online now. This document's about 15 pages. I'm going to go through the first 5, and then there's detail behind it. I'm afraid to say that the problem is we face the gravest economic crisis since the Second World War. We've got an extraordinary combination of 4 factors that cause this gravest crisis. We've got a growth crisis. We've got the lowest growth forecasts for 70 years. 70 years. Just think about that. And yet at the same time, we've got the highest tax burden for 70 years. Do you think the two are connected? It's about time people worked it out.
Same in Scotland with Wee Nippy. I spoke to one of Wee Nippy's economic advisors, and I said to him, he didn't want to get taped, and I said to him, you've raised taxations and got less tax receipts. He said, well, that's because of growth. Well, do you not think you're slowing the growth rate down by increasing taxes? Maybe if you did the opposite and reduced taxes, you would increase growth and thereby get more tax receipts. I think it was beyond them. I think they're ideologically driven rather than actually know anything about economics. But Richard's completely correct. Nice guy, Eddie.
We've got the highest taxes for 70 years. You're not going to get growth if you keep taxing the economy and taxing people. We've also got something that, of course, many people have never experienced before. This bogeyman, inflation. We've got the highest inflation for some 30 years plus.
Well, if you lock everybody in the houses, the Ramoners and the globalist shills are blaming Brexit, but if you've locked everybody in your houses for 2 years over a cold, then I'm not surprised we've got inflation.
It is truly an inflation crisis. It's heading to 10%. Who knows where it stops? And then fourthly, we've got a productivity crisis. and there's a slide showing that later in the presentation. Public sector productivity is the worst for some 20 years. And tragically, we've now got a record 5.3 million people on out-of-work benefits.
Now, I really like Richard Tice, but I think he has to be a wee bit more... he's a lovely fella, that's why he's called Nice Guy Eddie, but he needs to be a wee bit more... have a wee bit more woomph about him, a wee bit more like, Boris, he needs to have a wee bit more presidential and outward enthuse of emotion but I mean, this sort of very placid, very similar to Stammers, but I think you need a wee bit more oomph. He's correct in everything he says. In fact, he's more correct than any other politician in the British political system at present. So you would be better voting for this fella, but he would get more if it was more exuberance.
Just digest that for a second. That's 1 in 8 of the working population. 1 in 8 are on out-of-work benefits. It's 1.5 million more than pre-COVID. And the truth is, it's a tragedy for the individuals concerned, because being out of work is not good for your mental or your physical well-being. It's not good for your family. It's not good for children to grow up in a jobless household. It's not good for communities. And the truth is, it's a tragic loss of talent. Everybody is talented. It's about finding it, motivating it, infusing it. 1 in 8 people at home.
Yeah, but this is where the libertarian, you need to find what the individual wants to do and facilitate the individual doing it, not trying to fit your cogs into your wheel where you want them to fit.
Out of work. And yet we're told there's a labour shortage. Something doesn't compute. That is the depth of this crisis. And I believe that these 4 factors have never come together in this way, in this dramatic, significant way,
Let me
since
see
the
what you
Second
guys
World
are
War.
saying.
And that's why I think it's so grave. My concern is that the government, they either haven't worked it out, in which case they're incompetent, or they know it, but they're not telling us, in which case they're dishonest. That's the gravity of the crisis we face. Now, I know some will say, oh, well, it's all your fault. It's Brexit, isn't it? I mean, they would say that. So let's just look at the evidence, shall we? Evidence is quite useful, I think. It's interesting, isn't it? The 2 decades where we had the highest growth since the Second World War was before we joined the common market, the 50s and 60s. And there's a slide that shows that. And every decade since, our growth has declined. So the more we got into the depths of the European Union, the lower the growth we had. So therein lies the opportunity, as long as the government does the right thing. We've got this opportunity, but they're not grasping it.
But I mean, I think there's been slides showing that Boris Johnson was also taught by Dr. Evil, Klaus Schwab, as was Macron, Turdo and Horseyface in New Zealand. All of these are products of Schwab's incompetence. So the globalists are in power in every major Western political party. Although they're more like the Sith, because they didn't announce themselves prior to getting elected that they were in this globalist cabal, which all the media and tech and even Susan Trzynski or whatever her name is, who runs that YouTube, was over there. So I mean, all of them are an ad hoc to Klaus Schwab.
They're not cutting taxes. They're not cutting unnecessary regulation. So it doesn't stack up on a growth point of view.
So that Boris hasn't done any of this as well. I mean, Boris could have been doing this for the last 2 years and he's just twiddled his thumb.
Then let's look at, oh, well, it's Brexit's fault that we've got all this inflation. Nonsense. The bulk of the inflation is caused by the price of energy. which is so critical to absolutely everything. That's why across most major European countries that are over-dependent, for example, on Russian gas, they've got inflation too. We've got high energy prices because this government, over the last decade, saw fit to outsource huge chunks of our energy. And there's one country that doesn't have an inflation problem at the moment in the middle of Europe. It's a very well-known country, very successful country.
Hungary.
Very stable. It's not in the European Union.
Oh, it's not in the European Union.
And it's got the lowest inflation.
Wow.
Why? Because it's got its own independent, self-reliant energy policy. It's called Switzerland. It's a very nice place. And then we're told, well, it's all Brexit's fault, we haven't got any Labour. Well, let's just look at the evidence, shall we? The reality is, we've got the biggest population ever in this country, ever. Last year, we had a record number of visas issued, about 1 million visas. So let's just work this out. We've got a record population, we've got a record number of visas, we've got more jobs than we've got vacancies, and we've got the record number of people on out-of-work benefits. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to work out that something doesn't compute. It's got nothing to do with Brexit. It's got everything to do with the systemic failures of our benefits policy. So now we've dealt with the Brexit suggestion. I want you to imagine you're a football manager, you're leading a team, you're managing a team, it's a major cup final, it's half-time, and the bad news is you're 4-0 down. I've almost been there, actually, with Liverpool. But anyway, what do? Do you realise that the strategy's going wrong? It's not working. The tactics are not working. Do you make changes now? Or do you pray for a miracle and wait until the 85th minute and hope that something turns up? This government just continues to pray for a miracle and hope that something turns up and waits to the 85th minute. That is the wrong strategy. We have to act now. We have to make changes now. And if we do, then things can change. Now, unfortunately, the Chancellor, he seems to have gone through something of a name change. Because I'm not sure whether to call him Rishi Corbyn or Comrade Sunak. Because everything he's doing has a form of socialism to it. He's raising personal taxes. He's raising corporate taxes. He's raising government spending. And he's creating, in his generous wisdom, a dependency, subsidy culture. That is literally almost the definition of socialism. And that's why I invented this word, consocialist, consocialism, because it's just differing forms of the same thing. The result, of course, is lower growth, inflation will remain high.
And Nicola Sturgeon's doing exactly the same thing in Scotland. There's not really any difference between the socialism that the Conservatives are pushing and the socialism that Nicola Sturgeon's pushing underneath.
And we've got
from an economic point of view as well as the COVID point of view.
Tragic disincentive to work with 5.3 million people on out-of-work benefits.
See, the thing about that is, I mean, I've setting up companies.
That is not the way forward.
So I'm doing something in the meantime. Other people who might be on benefits might be trying to do something because they can't get access. I mean, I didn't get any debt recovery COVID loans. I've never had a penny from government to actually set up the businesses from both the public and the private sector. I've never received any money to actually get the business up and going. And I've had to spend all my money to actually get these businesses up and going through what I'm doing. So, and it's taking a hell of a lot longer. Instead of taking a year, it might take, when I get a loan or some way of development finance, it takes 5 years for me to get to the same stage if I got the loan in the first place. So they're screwing up in the fact that they're not giving money to entrepreneurs to actually create the wealth in itself. So that maybe should be addressed as well.
Forward for this country. What is needed is significant, dramatic change. Reform UK's solution is big, it's bold, and it will be effective. The first thing is we should cut income tax. People who pay income tax cut that hard by lifting the
Well, cutting income tax to zero tax below 20 grand is going to help the most disadvantaged, but you're going to have to help people who are at the lower rungs of society. I mean, it's very difficult to get out of the debt cycle, but if you're making stupid policies, which the Conservatives certainly have, and destroying people's incomes, then deliberately by policy, destroying people's incomes by policy, then we have to look at that.
threshold at which you pay income tax from £12,500 to £20,000. That's about 30 quid a week. For the least well off, for the lowest paid, that makes a really significant difference. And let's remember, income tax was originally invented over 300 years ago to pay for a war as a temporary tax, but there we are. It was invented as a tax on the rich, but it's become a tax on the poor. So we should lift the rate at which people pay income tax. That immediately creates a bigger difference between being
that's a good policy.
on benefits and working, how much money you save in your pocket when you work. The next thing we have to do is we have to cut the cost of living by reducing taxes on a rate.
That's good. Scrap VAT on energy bills, which is a very interesting thing. I don't think we could have done that if we were part of the EU. Save £100.
Range of consumer items, the key things that everybody has to pay for. The Brexit bonus opportunity, we're allowed to scrap VAT on energy bills. And for some reason, the Prime Minister, who played such a significant role in Brexit, seems to have bottled on this idea. We should scrap 5% VAT on energy bills immediately. That's about 100 quid a year for the average household. We should scrap the environmental levies.
We should reduce the size of the public sector and get them, and we could release that talent into the private sector,
which pay for the renewable subsidies. That's about £160 per household. And when we talk about the renewables, you talk about windfall. The people who've had a windfall is the renewable industry. Because, of course, all their subsidies, guess what? They're inflation linked. What's happened to inflation? It's gone through the roof. What's happened to their profits? Gone through the roof. The third key thing we should do, and I'm very grateful and pay tribute to Howard Cox of Fair Fuel UK, who's been campaigning for this for decades. Howard's here in the room and has been busy as a bee recently, because not only do we have to cut fuel duty hard, but we have to make sure that it gets passed on to us, the customer. We're recommending that we should cut fuel duty by 20p. Germany's done 25. Ireland's done 17. And we've done
0.
It's reactive, it's too late, it's not enough. 20p a litre would save the average driver some £240 a year.
And this is Nicola Sturgeon, the dough balls in the green, trying to stop environmental policy. Now, it's important that we actually move towards renewable energy, because obviously fossil fuels is a finite substance, and once it's gone, it'll be gone. So we have to transition away from that. But the transition could be slower and longer. If you want to absorb more CO2, plant more trees, terraform, get salination or desalination tanks, pump water over the Sahara Desert, and try and stimulate growth there. They're doing some very interesting things in Saudi Arabia, where you can pump water from and that will reduce sea levels and hopefully re-fertilise the Sahara Desert, thereby trapping CO2. So there's lots of things that can be done. And but there's still going to be a requirement, because renewables are renewable and fossil fuels are declining energy source, that we would have to move away from that anyway. So we should continue to progress with the green agenda. However, it should be done in a slower time period. We don't contribute with half the CO2 emissions. We should continue to half it. Some people who can afford electric cars should have electric cars, and we should be improving the battery life, energy storage in these cars. So, and obviously, using our universities to help with battery storage or electricity storage in batteries, so that it's got a greater range. And that should be the move forward. I believe that there's also the ability to fuel cars by water, and there's other things that we should be looking at to find out if there's other greener renewable or easily accessible renewable energy sources, and that's just what we're going to have to do. But it's a gradual move away. It's not putting those in the poorest areas and putting them in electricity or energy debt, because they're struggling to heat their homes. That's not acceptable. You need to have a way of actually helping these individuals.
This is real money in people's budgets. Now, talking of budgets, I think most households around the country are saying, well, things are tough. We need to save £5 in 100, give or take, maybe more. And we can all do that. What about the government says to all its spending across all its departments, all councils, right, folks, you've got to save £5 in 100. We're all doing it at home. The government should do the same. There's no talk about this in the government, in the cabinet. Very soon you talk about real money. You talk about 55 billion quid, which pays for the bulk of our stimulus of just over 70 billion quid. The next and final thing that we should do is we should reduce VAT on everything from 20% to 18%, which again would save the...
Well, don't forget it's a flat tax that affects the least well off more, VAT, so it's a flat tax.
The average household about £300 a year. The thing about all these measures is because they reduce prices, guess what happens to inflation? Inflation will reduce from its current high levels. And the final thing is, the government, they use this great word, levelling up, but then they had to appoint a minister to work out what it means. I'll tell you what it means. We have a huge amount of treasure trapped in rocks, literally under the feet. It's called the shale gas treasure. The value of that treasure in the rocks, before extraction, is at least £1 trillion worth. What about £1 trillion worth of levelling up by drilling down? That would make much, much more difference to many more people's lives. It would cut bills, it would make us independently a self-reliant state in terms of energy, which we used to be before this government, this Conservative Party, changed. I believe that it is an act of gross negligence for politicians in Westminster not to explore extracting this treasure. Gross negligence. Boris likes to be a world leader. I mean, we've heard it time and again. Why don't we be a world leader in making the current method of extraction of shale gas, fracking, making it better and better? Why don't we be a...
Now, again, that, as I said, that's a finite source, and I'm not opposed to doing that. That will certainly reduce oil costs, but I mean, really, we have to be moving to electric cars and renewables over the period of time. This will be a relatively good short-term boost for the economy, but realistically, we have to move away from renewable energy, and also the use of plastics. As the fossil fuels go down, we still need fossil fuels to create plastics and other things other than just fuel.
World leader in looking at...
So again, the Green Party in Scotland were correct, and Horseyface from the Green Party is we do have to start recycling better, and we're missing our recycling targets in Scotland, but we have to start to recycle things better, and be able to reuse things over and over.
The other ways of extracting shale gas that are being tried elsewhere, that are being patented. Let's be a true world leader, Prime Minister, and unlock that £1 trillion+ worth. Levelling up, by drilling down. And what these measures would do is it would stimulate growth. We believe at least 0.5% every year. And I just want to say, these numbers...
But again, it's the entrepreneurs that create growth. What you should be doing is giving access to capital for entrepreneurs all over the UK. It's entrepreneurs that will create the growth more than anything else, and that's still something you've not touched on, Richard.
Numbers have been prepared very closely and carefully by Walbrook Economics, an independent economics consultancy, and they are available to review these numbers for anyone who wants to. And the calculation is that these measures would reduce inflation in year one by about 4%. Now that's a one-off, it's not every year, but nevertheless that is really significant because it changes the expectation, the direction of travel. And crucially, it would encourage the incentive to work. And for individuals and families and communities, that must be right. That really must be right. So, okay, 74 billion stimulus. Yes, it's a lot of money, but it's affordable. Firstly, it actually takes our tax take back to just pre-COVID levels. Just think about that. This is what's happened in the last couple of years. Many households, as I say, saving £5 in 100. Now,
so a stimulus of 74 billion or 3.3 GDP gross domestic product takes taxes at a percentage of GDP back to pre-lockdown levels. Many households save £5 in 100, 5%. Public spending saving 5% equals 55 billion per year. 25 billion in year one, raising to 55 billion in year two. Huge opportunities to cut waste and keep service levels. 18 billion for increased borrowing in year two, 0.8% GDP, and after 46 billion extra in year one. Self-funding on year three. I mean, if you think about how stupid the Labour Party are, this is excellently put together. And Doball, Diane Abbott couldn't actually find out how many police officers were being charged, but this is actually properly costed. Self-funding year three and accretive thereafter. Accretive. As measures will grow will grow economy faster, 0.5%, increase tax revenues medium term and reduce inflation due to lower prices. Unlock our huge hidden assets, shell gas 1 trillion and under the foot equals £30,000 per household, owned by all of us, transformed our national finances. Well, transforming national finances is something that finds its way down to the entrepreneurs to stimulate the businesses.
I accept it probably is too difficult for the government to save all of that money, that 55 billion, if it does the same in year one. So we'll be generous and say you've got to achieve that over 2 years. Maybe save 25 billion in year one, rising to 55 in year two. It's doable. We all see egregious examples of wasteful spending by public sector departments, by governments, by councils, all over the place. It drives you mad. Only one example I read over the weekend. The Bank of England's governor, who's paid over £500,000 a year.
What are you guys saying? Are you guys quiet on me today? You people don't know what socialism is. Agreed. Poor people shouldn't pay taxes. You mean before Thatcher changed it? Remember when we dug coal and burned these? Yeah. And I mean, as I said, the production of the most of the CO2s is in China, India, and the US. So unless what we do is relatively minor with our productions, and we have halved our productions of CO2 in the UK, so we're getting less and less significant as the Far East continue to pump out the CO2. And if they want to reduce it, start planting trees. You can do it individually. Plant a treaty. David Ballantyne planted a treaty.
He's so good that he couldn't work out a mission statement himself. So we had to pay an external consultant some £200,000 of our money to dream up a mission statement to incentivise his own staff. I've been a chief exec. If you're not good enough to work out your own mission statement with your own senior management team, trust me, you ain't good enough to be a chief